So we know, let's try that again. So we know that when we are looking for inverse trig functions, meaning sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, or cosecant inverse functions, we are plugging a number in for the x, and the answer that comes out is an angle. And for sine and tangent, we are going to pull our answers from quadrant 1 and quadrant 4, and our quadrant 4 answers must be negative angles. So that is for tangent and sine and their reciprocals. And for cosine, we're going to pull our answers from quadrant 1 and 2, and those may be positive angle answers. So let's give this a practice. We want to use the unit circle to find what is the sine inverse of 1/2. So go to your unit circle. We want to find, remember, sine inverse, we can look in quadrants 1 or quadrants 4. So we need to look in this half of the unit circle and ask ourselves, what has a sine, a y value of 1/2? Well, we can see that right here, a sine of 1/2, and so our answer is pi over 6. So sine inverse of 1/2 answer is pi over 6 radians, or 30 degrees, but we're going to use radians today. What is sine inverse of negative square root of 2 over 2? Again, you're going to look in this half of the unit circle. Where in this half of the unit circle is sine negative square root of 2 over 2? Well, right here at 7 pi over 4. However, remember, we want answers to be negative angles. So if this way to the diagonal is positive pi over 4, then this way to the diagonal is negative pi over 4. So the answer to this question, instead of 7 pi over 4, the answer to sine inverse of negative pi over 2 is negative pi over 4. If you give the answer of 7 pi over 4, that is incorrect. All right, cosine inverse of square root of 3 over 2. When we do a cosine inverse question, remember we're allowed to look in quadrants 1 and 2. So we're looking in this portion of the unit circle. Where do we have a cosine that is square root of 3 over 2? So remember, cosine is the x value. So cosine sine square root of 3 over 2, that is again pi over 6. So the answer to our first question in cosine is pi over 6. What about a cosine inverse of negative 1/2? That's saying, what is the angle that gives me a cosine of negative 1/2? So we're going to look in these first two quadrants. What angle gives me a cosine of negative 1/2? Well, that is right here, and it is 2 pi over 3. In quadrant 2, we're allowed to use that angle. So the answer will be 2 pi over 3. Let's try tangent now. How do I find tangent inverse of 1? Well, first of all, remember, for tangent inverse, we're allowed to look in quadrants 1 and 4. Which one of these has a sine over cosine, a y over x, top over top of 1? Well, if we look, square root of 2 divided by square root of 2 is 1. So the angle we're looking for is pi over 4. So tangent inverse of 1 is pi over 4. What about tangent inverse of negative square root of 3 over 3? Now, this one's a little trickier. The first thing you might want to look at is that the square root is on the top, but we have a 3 on the bottom. Well, can you sort of undo the rationalizing here and recognize that this came from negative 1 over square root of 3? Because if I take 1 over square root of 3 and I rationalize that by multiplying the top and the bottom by a square root of 3, I get square root of 3 over 3. So these things are equal to one another. So what we're really looking for here is a y over x of 1 over square root of 3. So let's come over here, and it needs to be a negative 1 over a square root of 3. So we get 11 pi over 6. But remember, if I put in the answer of 11 pi over 6, That is incorrect. I need a negative angle. And you can basically just take the denominator and put a negative on the front. So what is the answer here in terms of a negative? It's negative pi over 6. So we get this is equal to negative pi over 6. Those are the basic ones. And 90% of the time you're going to be doing inverse functions of sine, cosine, and tangent. But let's go ahead and practice a cosecant and a secant version just so that we can get the hang of these. So the easiest way to do a cosecant inverse is to remember the reciprocal and the inverse are different things. Reciprocal means flip it upside down. Inverse means plug in something and get an angle that's different. They're very different things. So what is the reciprocal of cosecant inverse? That's sine inverse of 1 over square root of 2. And if we rationalize this, that means we're looking for the sine inverse of square root of 2 over 2. Okay, so if we look at our unit circle, remember sine inverse, we're allowed to look in quadrants 1 and 4. What has the sine of square root of 2 over 2? Well, that is pi over 4. So our answer here is going to be pi over 4. Let's do a cosecant inverse of a negative. So remember, cosecant is the upside down of sine, not the inverse, the upside down or reciprocal. So this is sine inverse, and if we upside down or reciprocal the inside of negative square root of 3 over 2. So what has a sine inverse of negative square root of 3 over 2 from quadrants 1 and 4? Well, cosine sine, here it is, 5 pi over 3. So is our answer going to be 5 pi over 3? Is that how this works? No, it is not. Remember, we need to use negative pi over 3. All right, what about secant inverse of negative 2? Remember, how do I turn a whole number into a fraction? You put a 1 under it, put it over 1. And what is the reciprocal or the upside down of secant? That is cosine inverse. And the reciprocal of negative 2 is negative 1/2. So I need something that has a cosine of negative 1/2. Well, remember for cosine, we're allowed to look in quadrants 1 and 2. So what has a cosine of negative 1/2? That is 2 pi over 3. So our answer here will be 2 pi over 3. Last one. What has a cotangent of inverse of negative square root of 3 over 3? So the first thing I would do is remember, we're going to unrationalize this down to 1 over the square root of 3 as our cotangent inverse. Now, what is the reciprocal or the upside down, not the inverse, the upside down of cotangent? Well, the upside down of cotangent is tangent, and then we have to upside down the thing on the inside and keep it consistent. So we need a sine over cosine or a y over x of square root of 3 over 1. So, and it's going to be a negative. So remember, tangent, we're allowed to look in quadrants 1 and 4. What has a y over x of square root of 3 over 1? Well, that is 5 pi over 3, but remember, we have to write it as a negative, not a positive, so this is going to be negative 1 pi over 3 for our final answer here.